Marcus Thompson pressed his weathered palm against the cold concrete wall of New Haven's observation tower, his steel-gray eyes scanning the horizon where morning mist clung to the abandoned suburbs beyond their fortified perimeter. 3 years had passed since the Great Walls rose around their city, 3 years since 12,000 survivors had claimed this patch of Colorado mountain terrain as humanity's final stronghold against the walking dead. The former Marine sergeant had seen enough dawn patrols to know when something felt wrong, and today carried that familiar electric tension that made his jaw clench and his hand instinctively drift toward his sidearm. Below in the courtyard, Elena Rodriguez emerged from the medical center, her dark hair pulled back in the practical ponytail she'd worn since the early days when field hospitals were makeshift tents and hope was measured in doses of antibiotics. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had learned to compartmentalize horror, her medical bag swinging at her side as she headed toward the eastern gate where Jake Mitchell was already running diagnostics on the security systems. The young engineer's fingers danced across his tablet screen, checking the overnight sensor logs with the methodical precision that had kept their electronic defenses operational when spare parts were more valuable than gold. The radio crackled to life on Marcus's belt, and Rebecca Williams's voice cut through the static with an urgency that immediately straightened his spine. "Command, this is Becca on Sector 7 Patrol. I need you to see something down here, and I need you to see it now." At 19, Becca had survived longer outside the walls than most adults, her small frame and quick reflexes making her invaluable as a scout, but Marcus had never heard that particular edge in her voice before. He grabbed his rifle and descended the tower stairs 3 at a time, his boots echoing in the concrete stairwell as he radioed for Elena and Jake to meet him at Sector 7. The morning sun cast long shadows between the residential blocks as Marcus jogged through streets that had once bustled with the controlled chaos of a thriving survivor community. Children no longer played in the designated safe zones, and the usual sounds of reconstruction work had fallen silent as news of Becca's discovery spread through the communication network. David Carter, the elected council leader whose diplomatic skills had held their fragile democracy together through countless crises, emerged from the administrative building with Tommy Anderson, their head of security operations, both men's faces reflecting the gravity of whatever Becca had found. They converged at the Sector 7 checkpoint where Becca stood beside 2 figures that made Marcus's blood run cold. The Hendricks family, Tom and Martha, longtime residents who had contributed to the agricultural programs and helped maintain the greenhouse facilities, sat slumped against the checkpoint barrier. Their eyes held the familiar glassy stare that every survivor had learned to recognize, the telltale sign that the person they once knew was gone forever. But these weren't fresh infections from outside contact, and they weren't the result of any recorded breach in their perimeter defenses. Elena knelt beside Martha Hendricks, her medical training overriding the fear that Marcus could see in her trembling hands. Their body temperature is consistent with infection timeline, but there are no bite marks, no wounds of any kind. Her voice carried the clinical detachment she used when delivering impossible news. Based on the progression of symptoms, they would have been infected approximately 72 hours ago, but our logs show no security breaches, no unauthorized exits or entries. Jake's tablet screen displayed 3 days of sensor data, every entry and exit meticulously recorded, every perimeter scan showing secure green lights. "The system's been clean, Marcus. No alerts, no anomalies, no gaps in coverage." His young face had gone pale as the implications settled over the group like a suffocating blanket. David Carter stepped forward, his political instincts warring with the growing panic in his chest. "We need to implement immediate containment protocols. If there are infected inside our walls without any breach in security, we're looking at something we've never encountered before." His voice carried the authority that had guided them through supply shortages and territorial disputes, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty beneath the surface. Tommy Anderson checked his weapon and looked toward the residential sectors where 12,000 people were beginning their daily routines, unaware that their perfect safety record had just been shattered. "If it's spreading inside the walls without contact transmission, we need to know how many others might be affected, and we need to know it yesterday." Marcus felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders as he realized their greatest fear had finally materialized. The enemy had found a way inside their sanctuary, and they had no idea how many more ticking time bombs walked among them. The emergency council session convened in the reinforced conference room beneath the administrative building, where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the air carried the perpetual scent of recycled atmosphere that had become synonymous with survival. David Carter took his position at the head of the scarred wooden table that had witnessed countless debates about food rationing, work assignments, and the delicate balance between security and freedom that defined life in New Haven. Around him sat the 5 other council members whose decisions would determine whether their sanctuary remained humanity's last hope or became another tomb filled with walking corpses. Marcus Thompson stood near the door, his military bearing rigid as he delivered his preliminary report to faces that grew increasingly grim with each detail. "We've identified 7 more cases in the past 4 hours," he announced, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "All long-term residents, all showing identical symptoms with no external wounds or known contact with infected individuals. Lisa Patterson from the water treatment facility, Robert Kim from the engineering department, and 5 others from various sectors throughout the city." He paused, allowing the implications to settle before continuing. "Elena's medical team is conducting examinations, but we're looking at an infection vector we've never encountered before." Councilmember Patricia Walsh, a former federal emergency coordinator whose gray hair and lined face spoke to years of crisis management, leaned forward with her hands clasped tightly on the table surface. "We need immediate implementation of Containment Protocol 7, she declared, her voice brooking no argument. "Full quarantine of all affected sectors, mandatory testing for every resident, and isolation of anyone showing even preliminary symptoms. We cannot afford to hesitate when we're dealing with an unknown transmission method." The suggestion sent a ripple of tension through the room as Councilmember Jerome Butler, whose background in civil liberties law had made him the voice of individual rights within their community, shook his head vigorously. "Protocol 7 requires locking down 60% of our residential areas and separating families indefinitely," he countered, his dark eyes flashing with conviction. "We're talking about treating 12,000 people like prisoners based on 7 cases that we don't understand. The psychological damage alone could destroy everything we've built here." Elena Rodriguez entered the room carrying a tablet loaded with preliminary medical data, her scrubs still bearing traces of the morning's examinations. "The infection appears to be progressing at standard rates once symptoms manifest," she reported, addressing the council while shooting a meaningful glance toward Marcus. "But I'm seeing cellular degradation patterns that suggest the initial infection occurred through an entirely different mechanism than traditional zombie transmission. The affected individuals show no signs of external contamination, no defensive wounds, nothing that indicates they fought off an attacker." Councilmember Angela Brooks, whose expertise in logistics had kept their supply chains functional through 3 harsh winters, spread a series of charts across the table showing resource allocation projections. "If we implement full quarantine protocols, we're looking at a 40% reduction in agricultural output, complete suspension of our manufacturing operations, and the need to double our medical supply consumption," she explained, her finger tracing the devastating numbers. "Our food reserves will last maybe 6 weeks under those conditions, and that's assuming no additional complications." Tommy Anderson stepped into the conversation from his position near the tactical displays, his security expertise adding weight to the military perspective. "Every hour we delay decisive action, we risk exponential spread," he argued, his voice carrying the urgency of someone who had seen communities fall to indecision. "If this infection can transmit through water, air, or some other vector we haven't identified, waiting for perfect information could mean losing everything. We have protocols for a reason, and Protocol 7 exists specifically for this scenario." David Carter felt the familiar weight of leadership pressing down on his shoulders as he watched the council fracture along predictable lines, their unity cracking under the pressure of an impossible choice. "Elena, what's your medical recommendation for immediate action?" he asked, seeking guidance from the person who understood the biological threat better than anyone else in the room. "I need time to determine the transmission vector," Elena replied, her scientific training warring with the crisis management instincts that had kept her patients alive through countless emergencies. "Rushing into quarantine could be exactly the wrong response if we're dealing with something environmental or systematic rather than person-to-person transmission. But if this is some new form of airborne contagion, every minute of delay puts more people at risk." The room fell silent as each council member grappled with the reality that their next decision would either save New Haven or condemn it to join the countless other failed settlements scattered across the wasteland beyond their walls. Outside, 12,000 people continued their daily routines, unaware that their fate hung in the balance of a debate that had no perfect answers, only the terrible mathematics of survival where every choice carried the potential for catastrophic consequences. Jake Mitchell's fingers flew across his keyboard in the climate-controlled server room that served as New Haven's digital nerve center, his young face illuminated by multiple monitor screens displaying cascading data streams that told the story of their city's vital signs. Every water flow measurement, every air circulation reading, every electronic access log from the past week scrolled past his bloodshot eyes as he searched for the invisible thread that connected 7 impossible infections. The engineering prodigy who had once debugged corporate networks now found himself hunting for patterns that could determine whether humanity's last sanctuary would survive another sunrise. 3 floors above, Elena Rodriguez moved through the hastily established medical quarantine wing with the methodical precision of someone who refused to let panic cloud her scientific judgment. Each of the 7 infected residents had been isolated in separate rooms, their conditions monitored around the clock as she documented every detail of their physiological decline. Martha Hendricks had progressed furthest, her cognitive functions nearly gone as the familiar glassy stare of the infected replaced any trace of the woman who had tended greenhouse tomatoes just days earlier. Lisa Patterson from water treatment still retained fragments of awareness, occasionally calling out for her daughter before the infection pulled her consciousness back into its inexorable darkness. Marcus Thompson stood in the corridor outside the quarantine rooms, his tactical radio crackling with reports from patrol teams conducting door-to-door wellness checks throughout the residential sectors. The systematic sweep had already uncovered 3 additional cases: Frank Morrison from the maintenance crew, 18-year-old Amy Chen from the education department, and Dr. Richard Stone, whose expertise in biochemistry had made him invaluable to their agricultural programs. The randomness of the affected individuals defied every pattern Marcus had learned to recognize during his years of combat experience, creating a puzzle that seemed to mock their desperate attempts at logical analysis. Becca Williams emerged from the eastern residential sector carrying a clipboard filled with interview notes from family members and neighbors of the infected, her usually confident demeanor showing cracks of frustration as each conversation yielded more questions than answers. "Nobody saw anything unusual, Marcus," she reported, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been conducting interviews since dawn. "No strange sounds, no unusual visitors, no changes in behavior until the symptoms started showing. It's like they just went to sleep normal and woke up dying." The breakthrough came when Jake's pattern recognition software identified a correlation buried deep in the city's environmental monitoring data. "Marcus, you need to see this," he called out over the intercom system, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and dread. "I found something in the atmospheric readings from the central ventilation system." When Marcus arrived in the server room, Jake pointed to a graph showing subtle fluctuations in air composition measurements taken from various sectors over the past 10 days. "Look at these spikes in trace particulate matter, specifically in sections 7, 12, and 15. Elena joined them within minutes, her medical bag still slung over her shoulder as she studied Jake's findings with the focused intensity that had made her one of the most respected physicians in their community. "Those are the exact sectors where we found infected individuals," she observed, her mind already racing through the implications. "If something is being distributed through our air circulation system, it would explain the random geographic distribution and the lack of person-to-person transmission patterns." The revelation sent a chill through Marcus as he realized the scope of what they were facing. "Jake, trace those particulate readings back to their source," he ordered, his military training taking over as the situation shifted from medical crisis to potential sabotage investigation. "If someone or something has compromised our environmental systems, we need to know how and when it happened." Tommy Anderson's voice crackled through the radio system with an urgency that made everyone in the server room freeze. "All units, we have a situation at the north gate. Unknown aircraft spotted on approach, approximately 2 miles out and closing fast." The security chief's report added a new dimension of threat to their already critical situation, forcing Marcus to split his attention between the internal investigation and potential external danger. David Carter's voice followed over the general announcement system, his diplomatic tone carefully controlled despite the multiple crises converging on their community. "All residents are advised to remain in their current locations until further notice. Council members report to the Emergency Command Center immediately. This is not a drill." As Marcus grabbed his rifle and prepared to respond to the external threat, Elena continued studying Jake's atmospheric data with growing alarm. "Marcus, if these readings are accurate, the contamination event started 9 days ago," she called after him. Whatever introduced this infection into our air system has had over a week to spread throughout the entire city. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow as he realized that their careful quarantine measures might already be too late, and that the approaching aircraft could represent either salvation or the final nail in New Haven's coffin. The aircraft that approached New Haven's northern perimeter carried no identifying markings, its sleek black silhouette cutting through the morning sky like a harbinger of the chaos that had been building beyond their walls for the past week. Marcus Thompson reached the North Gate observation post just as the helicopter settled onto the designated landing pad, its rotors whipping dust and debris across the concrete platform where Tommy Anderson waited with a full security detail, their weapons trained on the aircraft's passenger compartment. The pilot, who emerged, wore military fatigues without unit insignia, his weathered face bearing the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had witnessed civilization's final collapse from the cockpit of his machine. Colonel James Harrison stepped onto the platform with the bearing of a career officer whose world had been reduced to a handful of scattered outposts and the impossible mission of coordinating humanity's last scattered defenses. "Thompson, I hope your people are ready for what's coming," he announced without preamble, his voice cutting through the rotor wash as his aircraft powered down. "We've been tracking a massive horde moving through the Denver corridor for the past 72 hours, estimated 50,000 strong and heading directly for your position. They'll reach your outer perimeter before nightfall." The colonel's intelligence briefing in the command center revealed the scope of the external threat that had been building while New Haven dealt with its internal crisis. Satellite imagery displayed on the main screen showed an undulating mass of infected bodies stretching across miles of abandoned highway, their movement patterns suggesting a coordination that defied everything the survivors had learned about zombie behavior. "They're not wandering randomly like we've seen before," Harrison explained, pointing to aerial photographs that made Marcus's stomach clench with recognition. "Something is drawing them here specifically, and they're moving with purpose." David Carter absorbed the colonel's report while simultaneously processing updates from Elena's medical team about the spreading internal infection. 17 residents now showed symptoms of the mysterious airborne contagion, with new cases appearing every few hours despite their hastily implemented containment measures. "Colonel, we're dealing with a compromised air circulation system that's infected nearly 24 of our people," David explained, his diplomatic training helping him maintain composure while delivering impossible news. "If we're forced into extended siege conditions with thousands of zombies at our walls, we're looking at a complete breakdown of our quarantine protocols." Tommy Anderson coordinated defensive preparations from the Tactical Operations Center, his security teams racing to reinforce perimeter positions that had been designed to handle raids by small groups rather than massive coordinated assaults. The wall-mounted displays showed defensive positions being manned throughout the city's outer ring, with ammunition stocks and heavy weapons being distributed to key choke points. "We've got enough firepower to hold them for maybe 72 hours if they attack in waves," Tommy reported, his tactical assessment cutting through any illusions about their chances. "But if 50,000 zombies hit us simultaneously, our ammunition reserves won't last through the first night." Jake Mitchell worked frantically to trace the source of the atmospheric contamination while the city prepared for siege, his multiple computer screens displaying ventilation schematics and air flow patterns that might hold the key to stopping the internal spread of infection. The young engineer had identified the contamination's point of origin in the central air processing facility, but reaching that location would require crossing through sectors where infected residents were beginning to turn into the walking dead that had consumed the world beyond their walls. "Marcus, I think I can shut down the compromised system, but I need a security escort to get to the main environmental controls," Jake called out over the communication system, his voice tight with the urgency of someone who understood they were running out of time. Rebecca Williams returned from her latest scouting mission with reports that confirmed their worst fears about the approaching horde. "They're not behaving like normal zombies," she announced, her usually steady voice betraying traces of fear that she couldn't quite suppress. "I watched them navigate around obstacles, change direction when they hit impassable terrain, and maintain formation over difficult ground. It's like something is controlling them, giving them purpose beyond just following noise or movement." As afternoon shadows lengthened across New Haven's defensive positions, Marcus stood atop the main wall watching the horizon where dust clouds marked the approach of humanity's potential extinction. Behind him, the city's 12,000 residents continued their evacuation to underground shelters, unaware that nearly 30 of their neighbors had already succumbed to the mysterious airborne infection. The radio chatter from defensive positions painted a picture of controlled panic as ammunition was distributed, medical stations were established, and families said goodbye to loved ones who might not survive the coming night. Colonel Harrison joined Marcus on the wall, his binoculars trained on the approaching threat that would test every defensive measure they had spent 3 years perfecting. "Son, I've seen a lot of settlements fall," the colonel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of countless failures. "But I've never seen one face threats from both inside and outside simultaneously. If your people can hold through this, you might just be writing the first chapter of humanity's comeback story." The first zombie scouts appeared on the horizon just as Jake Mitchell descended into the forgotten maintenance tunnels beneath New Haven's Central District, his tablet's LED screen casting eerie shadows on concrete walls that hadn't seen human activity since the city's construction 3 years earlier. Marcus Thompson followed close behind, his rifle ready as they navigated the narrow passages that Jake had discovered while tracing the atmospheric contamination to its source. The underground network stretched far beyond anything shown on their official city blueprints, revealing a hidden infrastructure that someone had clearly been using without authorization from the council or security departments. Elena Rodriguez coordinated the medical response from her makeshift command post in the emergency shelter, where 37 infected residents were now being held in isolation as their conditions deteriorated at an alarming rate. Her latest tests had confirmed that the airborne pathogen was unlike anything in their database of known zombie-related infections, displaying characteristics that suggested artificial enhancement or modification. "David, these aren't naturally occurring transmission vectors," she reported over the secure communication channel, her voice heavy with implications that chilled everyone listening. "Someone engineered this infection specifically to bypass our standard containment protocols." Above ground, Tommy Anderson watched through high-powered binoculars as the massive zombie horde approached their outer defensive perimeter, the Walking Dead moving across the landscape with the terrifying coordination that Rebecca Williams had reported. The front ranks of infected bodies stretched across a mile-wide front, their decaying forms shambling forward with relentless purpose while thousands more followed behind in a grotesque parade that seemed to extend beyond the horizon. "All defensive positions, prepare for contact in approximately 30 minutes, Tommy announced over the tactical network, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the impossible odds they faced. Deep in the tunnel system, Jake's tablet suddenly detected wireless signals that should not have existed in the abandoned underground passages, electronic signatures indicating active communication equipment hidden somewhere in the labyrinthine network. "Marcus, someone's been operating down here recently," Jake whispered, his voice echoing off the curved concrete walls as they moved deeper into the mysterious passages. "These signal readings show encrypted data transmission that's been ongoing for weeks, maybe months." The discovery took on new significance when they reached a junction chamber where multiple tunnel branches converged, revealing evidence of recent human habitation that made Marcus's blood run cold with recognition. Sleeping bags, battery-powered equipment, and containers of preserved food indicated that someone had been living beneath their city for an extended period, operating completely outside their knowledge or security oversight. Most disturbing were the laboratory materials scattered across makeshift workbenches, scientific equipment that could have been used to develop and deploy the airborne pathogen that was systematically destroying their community from within. Rebecca Williams's voice crackled through their radio communication with an urgency that sent adrenaline surging through Marcus's system. "Command, the horde has stopped approximately 1 mile from our perimeter," she reported from her forward observation post. "They're not advancing anymore, just standing there like they're waiting for something. I've never seen zombie behavior like this before." The tactical implications of Rebecca's report became clear when Jake's electronic scanning equipment detected a powerful radio transmitter hidden deeper in the tunnel network, its signal strength indicating communication capability that could reach far beyond New Haven's boundaries. "Marcus, whoever's been operating down here has the ability to communicate with outside parties," Jake announced, his engineering expertise allowing him to trace the signal patterns. "If someone's been coordinating both the internal infection and the external horde attack, this is their command center." David Carter's voice echoed through the underground passages as he coordinated the city's desperate defensive preparations from the surface command center. "All teams, we have confirmed sabotage elements operating within our perimeter," he announced, his diplomatic composure finally cracking under the weight of their impossible situation. "Security teams are to treat any unauthorized personnel as hostile threats until further notice." The breakthrough came when Marcus and Jake reached the heart of the underground facility, where a bank of sophisticated communication equipment hummed with active signals connecting their hidden saboteur to the approaching zombie army. Computer screens displayed tactical information about New Haven's defenses, population distribution data, and most chilling of all, a countdown timer showing exactly when the coordinated attack would begin. "Jake, can you trace these communications back to whoever's been controlling this operation?" Marcus asked, his military training taking over as he realized they were facing an organized enemy rather than random catastrophe. Already on it, Jake replied, his fingers flying across the interface as he accessed the hidden system's communication logs. Marcus, these signals are going to multiple locations across the region. This isn't just an attack on New Haven, it's part of something much bigger. As the countdown timer reached its final minutes, Marcus understood that their community's survival depended not just on defending their walls against the approaching horde, but on stopping the human enemy who had orchestrated both the internal infection and the external siege from the shadows beneath their feet. The countdown timer reached 0 at precisely 1800 hours, and the coordinated nightmare that had been building for days exploded into terrifying reality as 50,000 zombies surged forward against New Haven's outer walls while the infected residents inside the city began their final transformation into walking dead. Marcus Thompson sprinted through the underground tunnels toward the hidden communication center, his radio crackling with reports of breaches along multiple sections of their defensive perimeter as Tommy Anderson's security teams fought desperately to hold positions that were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Dr. Richard Stone emerged from the shadows of the underground facility's main chamber, his once respected face now bearing the cold calculation of someone who had orchestrated humanity's potential extinction with scientific precision. The biochemist who had contributed to New Haven's agricultural success revealed himself as the architect of their destruction, his laboratory equipment confirming Elena's worst suspicions about the engineered nature of the airborne pathogen. "You're too late, Thompson," Stone announced with disturbing calm, his hand hovering over a control panel that connected him to sabotage operations throughout the city. Phase 1 was the internal infection, Phase 2 is the external assault, and Phase 3 will ensure that no trace of your precious sanctuary survives to tell the story. Above ground, Elena Rodriguez raced through corridors filled with the screams of infected residents who were completing their transformation into creatures that no longer recognized former friends and neighbors as anything more than prey. The medical center had become a battlefield where her staff fought to maintain quarantine protocols while defending themselves against patients who had become enemies. "All medical personnel, fall back to secondary positions," Elena commanded over her radio, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her as she coordinated the evacuation of uninfected patients to reinforced safe rooms. Jake Mitchell worked frantically at his portable computer interface, attempting to hack into Stone's sabotage network while Marcus held off the biochemist with his rifle trained on the man who had betrayed everything they had built together. The young engineer's fingers flew across his keyboard as he fought through layers of encrypted security protecting the systems that controlled not only the approaching zombie horde but also explosive charges placed throughout New Haven's critical infrastructure. "Marcus, he's got bombs planted in the power station, the water treatment facility, and the main food storage areas," Jake reported, his voice tight with the urgency of someone trying to prevent total annihilation. "If those charges detonate, the city becomes uninhabitable even if we somehow survive the attack." The battle for New Haven's walls reached its crescendo as Rebecca Williams led a desperate counterattack against zombie forces that had breached the eastern gate, her knowledge of the city's defensive positions allowing her to coordinate flanking maneuvers that bought precious time for civilian evacuations. Tommy Anderson's voice echoed across the tactical network as he directed ammunition resupply to positions where defenders were running dangerously low on firepower. "All units, concentrate fire on the breach points," he commanded, his tactical expertise keeping their defensive line intact despite overwhelming odds. "We hold here or we lose everything." David Carter made the impossible decision to authorize the use of their emergency explosive reserves, ordering controlled detonations that collapsed sections of their own outer wall to create choke points where smaller defensive teams could concentrate their fire against the endless wave of walking dead. The blast echoes reverberated through the underground tunnels where Marcus faced the man whose betrayal had brought them to the brink of extinction. "Why?" Marcus demanded, his finger tight on his rifle's trigger as he watched Stone's hand move toward the detonation controls. "We gave you everything, trusted you with our lives, our children's futures." Stone's laugh carried the bitter edge of someone whose sanity had fractured under the weight of witnessing civilization's collapse. "Because this isn't survival, it's just delaying the inevitable," he replied, his scientific mind twisted by despair into believing that humanity's extinction was preferable to their continued struggle. "I'm offering mercy, a quick end instead of years of slow starvation and gradual degradation." Jake's breakthrough came at the moment when Stone reached for the detonation trigger, the young engineer successfully penetrating the sabotage network and reversing the signal that had been controlling the zombie horde's coordinated advance. "Got it?" Jake shouted, his success immediately visible on the tactical displays as the massive zombie army outside their walls suddenly lost its terrifying organization and reverted to the random wandering behavior that had characterized The Walking Dead for years. Marcus pulled the trigger without hesitation, his military training overriding any personal feelings as he stopped Stone's hand inches from the controls that would have destroyed their city. The biochemist's body slumped forward across his equipment, his betrayal ending with the sharp crack of gunfire that echoed through the tunnels like a liberation bell. The immediate crisis was over, but as Marcus and Jake emerged from the underground facility, they could hear the continued sounds of battle from the walls where their community fought to reclaim their sanctuary from the chaos that had nearly consumed them all.